Okay, first of all, just some logistic stuff. So for the upcoming Europe summit, we have one working group session accepted. And for KubeCon China in June, it's still, I think, in review process. And at the CNCF level, they kick off the SEEK proposal voting. I don't think they have quorum now, but I would presume they will have it soon. And there's a new effort to add stakeholders, basically relevant SEEKs for the policy working group. So we can review the pull report here. Okay, the main agenda today. So I want to do like a quick readout for the case studies we've been having from at least the end of last year. So I did some like summary last week, and so we have so far have like many interesting United talks. So let me just go over to the document section. So I think I when I write down the summaries, I was like so glad that we did all the invited talks, and I combed through all the recordings. Well, we did have some very interesting discussions. So let me just walk through like quick summary of the findings during our past discussions. So first of all, for the OPA gatekeeper, previously known as the Kubernetes policy controller. So I won't cover all the introduction. So during our case study session, I think what we mostly discuss is, for example, the main differences between the gatekeeper and its predecessor is the addition of like the constraint and constraint template controller and data sync controller instead of the single audit controller. And what like sparked most of the discussion was about the constraint template controller. So the introduction of the constraint template controller basically helped separating the constraint parameter from the policy itself. So we discussed like interesting use case like live tuning the policy, and like bunch of other future use cases. So this is mostly about the OPA gatekeeper. Last week we have the talk from the Istio team. Again, really interesting. I think one of the takeaways is that they are actually working on defining a like standalone authorization policy, which I think we don't have in Kubernetes, right?
I don't know what they mean necessarily. What do they mean by authorization policy?
So they basically put everything authorization related into this like unified authorization policy object. So they used to define all those stuff in the service role binding object. So they now I think starting 1.2, They will have the authorization policy object. And also they are exploring like more policy verbs other than allow or deny semantics, and also resolve the confliction. Like, so what they are having now is like very simple. For example, all the denies precedes all the allows and something like that. But they also mentioned they would love to have more complex design for the policy confliction resolution, like because you have like very nuanced like actions that just more complex than like all denies precedes all allows. Yes, I think overall is still security policy wise. I think they are they have more progress than in the Kubernetes side. Well,
I'll have to check and watch that recording. It sounds interesting.
Yeah,
it's so difficult. All of these words are so vague. Like sometimes when I'm writing things, I'm like, I'm not sure if I know what I'm talking about or if I'm just putting buzzwords down.
Yeah, please find that. Yeah, the talk itself is very informative.
Okay, and that was for 1.2. You said?
Yeah, this is beyond 1.1. So for the recent 1.1, they didn't have this yet, I think.
And for are they thinking the authorization for service to service communication or for like more?
I think they aim for both. So they just categorize into two aspects. So end user to the service and service to service. So they want to cover both with authorization policy object.
Huh. And are they thinking of sort of just getting rid of or not even dealing with other Kubernetes authorization objects, or is this a kind of layer on top of it?
I think they approach it as a layer on top of it.
Okay.
Yeah, as their general approach, but well, at least to my knowledge, Kubernetes is still so. So our discussion about like more verbs or have how to resolve the policy confliction is still a little bit like science fiction in the Kubernetes land. But at least I think they are actually actively working on it. It's amazing, I think.
It's interesting.
Yeah, we touch upon a bunch of other aspects. For example, they use MTLS combined with Envoy for most of the authentication. And so I asked them if they have problem running to like MTLS, the versioning problem, like 1.3 absolutely break the back compatibility with 1.2, stuff like that. So I don't think they have yet run into such problem, but I will presume in the future they might have, since it's like one of the major headaches for the MTLS stuff.
Yeah. MTLS is not trivial to set up and automate.
It's definitely not trivial task. Yeah. Well, anyways, just go check out that recording. I'm just writing down in very high level, like the summaries. Kubernetes side, I don't think I have finished all of the discussions. So multi-tenancy is we have Yisui came over to cover the security profile, I think the security profile proposal now mostly are being part of the new multi-tenant like policy proposal in the multi-tenant working group. I think that I don't even change this one. So at least from the original security profile proposal, they need to cover a really wide range of policies for like in order to guarantee the separation, either a soft multi-tenancy or hard multi-tenancy between the tenant. So they will cover like networking, policy security, authorization, many aspects. I think it would be definitely helpful to have like again a policy object for each area instead of if you look over the like there's a big table easily listed in the example section for the security profile proposal. I think it will be a headache, major headache, that if they list like everything in each of the areas. So storage policy, I think one of the interesting one about like new policy verbs. So they have existing policy for reclaim, snapshot content deletion, topology.
The topologies.
So, yeah.
There's been some recent stuff on work on that, right?
Yeah. So maybe they GA'd in the recent 14 release. I'm not sure. So they have also planned policies in the future for like periodic snapshot creation, like for how many like time intervals you can do that. Intention snapshot topology. So I think the big takeaway is the like requirement for the like a lot of additional verbs for the action semantics that is different from the traditional networking or security policy. Just the very simple allow, deny. Mm-hmm. They have like retain, delete, many self-defined. Will be very interesting. So data plan, Cilium. Again, another. I had a comment. So there's.
Yes, I know I would have a few to respond to on there.
There's a user space BPF implementation as well. So the takeaway from the Cilium one, so Cilium basically provides a policy-driven framework for BPFs in kernel or in user space. I think one of the main like point they raise is that to provide the API or ID awareness, although they have to work with additional technologies like SPIFFE to like map the identity with the IP address port and stuff. So the policy defined in Cilium is enforced via the eBPF mechanism, and so I think that at the core they are still doing the traditional allow, deny actions for networking security. But eBPF is something like like programming language for the lower level. I think we might be able to provide a like richer semantic policy enforcement through eBPF rather than just binary allow, deny. It should be possible. So SPIFFE, we had talk from Andrew, and so SPIFFE, for SPIFFE, they mostly concerned about like how the things should be identified. They mentioned that the attestation policy, for example, is defined in implementations such as Spire. I found something in the plugin proto. Instead of the SPIFFE spec itself. One thing raised during the discussion is whether it is possible to add, in addition to the trust domain, they have at the moment to add like policy domain into the SVID. I think what Andrew suggested is that they can use a extension for SVID for this addition is instead of just directly adding to the spec itself. So it could be something done in the configure request, the globe config. So another interesting is investigation would be the relationship between SPIFFE and Graphias. So which remains a like open question after that conversation. Tough notary, I think great talk from Justin. So tough basically is a metadata spec, right? So with this metadata spec, you can help secure the packaging of the software, and in total is about apply this idea to the supply chain, and Upton is for the self-driving OTA. I think the most like policy related aspect of TAF is about the like action and roles. For example, there could be some external policy framework for the like there's a revocation action defined in TAF or notary. Or in total, they have the concept of artifact rules. So again, this is like additional policy verbs like match, create. They have a bunch of this. Or layout. So Erica raised question about like how many layers you can have for layout. So I think the answer was you can have theoretically as much as you want, but still you need to have it's better to have a policy defined for the layout, for the layout of the layout, so know how how deep you can organize your in total layout. I think that's much it. I didn't expand on OPA very much since so I think so these are the takeaways from my side. I think that we can spot a trend for so having we can call it a standalone or unified policy object. For like authorization, authentication, we have the scheduling policy proposal. Just instead of have those fragments of policies in the configurations. I think this is a very obvious trend happening throughout the field. And I think people are now looking at like policy object should have various verbs instead of just the binary allow deny. So we just saw, for example, storage policy have like something reclaim, retain, or the in total have the artifact rules about create, match, something like that. And I think one of the reasoning for have a specific verb instead of, so there could be argument that like anything could be organized into the Boolean logic, right? For example, if I, instead of having a create policy verb, I could just transform into, so something like is like X create Y, like allowable, and you could define a binary like answer to that. I think the main reason for having a specific verb is mostly about the scalability. So this is a trade-off. If we have everything defined in the Boolean logic, basically you have to specify each and every conditions, right? Thus, the scalability will be very, very limited. So the upside to have specific verbs is that you can like have a great scalability to create semantic could like explore itself a policy space of its own. And of course, the downside will be introduce a much more complex policy system in it. Another thing is to have the adjectives or adverbs. This has to do with the policy conflict resolution or the priority. So we can define like strong, like or weak or medium, to have a more nuanced priority set for different like policies or policy verbs.
Do you think the trend towards using adverbs like that, like having classes, the strong or weak or whatever, versus just straight numbers for priority, is because that's just easier, and having like discrete finite number of things is better and more manageable? Or is it that it just hasn't been done well as like a scale?
I think it's largely do with the latter. So we touched upon this during the issue discussion last week. Like, so the default setting is very simple, right? So all the denies, for example, all the denies precedes all the allows. Other options will be something like you just mentioned. So the Istio team also looking at, for example, assigning like numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, to put things in order. But it just it just scales not that well, I think. So they still stick with the simple ordering of like all the denies precedes all the allows precedes other things. So I think the introduction of the adverbs would definitely help in that regard. So people have a more like expressive or declarative way of defining these priorities. Although I would presume there like a lot of work would need to be done in the backstage to enable this. But I think once we have the support in place, this would enable like developers to to write policies more efficiently and more correctly, well, safely. So yeah, I think this is definitely a direction that worth looking at. So I think together with we have the verbs for the action semantics, we have the adverbs or adjectives for the priority. I think together, then the policy object could effectively provide what we discussed before, like a type safe system for Kubernetes or Istio or Mesos, any forms of the cloud-native platforms. And OPA would be the policy engine that actually help check the safety of this type system. I think this could be the holistic picture that we have been looking for. So at least this is the takeaway from my side from all these discussions we had. Thoughts from you guys?
I took notes during the what individual sessions. I'll have to go back through them and can add particular notes if I have anything. The one thing I'm, maybe this is because it wasn't a big enough thing, is how dynamic the policies are ending up being. And does that make sense? What is the role of things that are taking in transient information or dealing with change and dynamic conditions? Is everyone just pushing that off?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that's like one of the major questions raised every time we have the working group session during KubeCon. It's definitely very difficult to handle the dynamic side of things. So I think people are still looking at the static policy at large at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. That came up in a particular conversation. We had a meetup last week. Andrew from Spiffy was there, Scytail was there, of course Torin and the OPA folks, we were there. And someone in the audience did ask, and like the context of LDAP users who you might want to apply or be the subject of different policies or roles. How do you import that in? And it changes constantly. And right now, to be honest, we don't have a good mechanism for that. You can import data into OPA policies, for example, but it's kind of like an import. You'd have to re-import and have some sort of scheduled task to do that. There's not like strong integrations with an LDAP system or Active Directory or anything to get that kind of dynamic user data, and certainly not for other metadata that might change frequently. So it's definitely an open problem.
Yeah, I think there's both the sort of grabbing and attaching the context for particular policy decisions as they get made. So most of the, I think like LDAP and auth groups things fall into that line, since the users and their groups might change, but it doesn't change within a policy decision, right? Mostly.
Yep.
Then there's the harder ones like quotas, where there actually is uncertainty that you can't even necessarily reconcile directly. But I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you should have another CID controller for the context, extracting the context. Yeah, this is a good, great point. Does OPA like record some of the context for each and every policy decision?
Does it record?
Like if a request is denied, well, we know certain policy is violated, but like the overall context for the decision, like something like the metadata of that session, right?
Yeah, I know. So I know you can test the policy a priori, but that's probably because it's all very static, right? So the fact that you load up the Rigo policy, you can kind of play it against your current objects and see which policies would be violated. But yeah, I don't know that it records any metadata. I think just the policy outcome. But I'll double check.
Okay.
You're going to need a whole policy, though, then around what you can record. So just get ready.
policy, right.
Policy of the policy of the policy. Okay. So what are the like next case studies we'd like to have? Like CI/CD policy is definitely one of the interesting topic. I
do have a contact for that. I have just been not working on a beach for 2 weeks.
Okay.
But I will contact some people involved in Spinnaker, and I think I can at least jump one person to get to Grapheus.
Cool. Robert, do you want to do like a updated talk about OPA, the most recent development?
Sure. I'm sure I can pull that together.
Maybe next week or?
Next week, actually, I'm in separate trips, so I'm gonna be traveling the next couple weeks. So maybe let me coordinate with Torrin and Ash and see if we can pull something together in the next couple weeks, and then maybe 2-3 weeks out we can present.
Sure.
I also know that Ash has to present to the SAFE working group, so
cool.
we might be able to reuse a lot of.
Yeah, that will be fine. So any other project? I think we've covered a lot already.
I think it would be cool to get some other, let's get some SE Linux discussion. Was there some other projects I came across recently?
What about does Harbor or Notary have a definite policy?
We did Notary.
Oh, sorry.
Justin had said that maybe we should do like a separate one just for Notary.
Anything else?
Looking.
I tried to grab Tim O'Clair coming over for this security update. So.
Yeah, we might want to do a sort of personal recap of what's going on in Kubernetes itself, since it's not a lot of policy stuff, for instance, seemed like it was rammed through from OpenShift. But now that OpenShift is doing everything through like CRDs and operator stuff, there isn't the same drive to put things into Kubernetes itself. And so I see a lot of the kind of native parts in Kubernetes and like a lot of the admission controllers or plugins, not controllers, plugins that are kind of lying on the wayside and not necessarily getting turned on anymore. And I don't know, it's maybe that's a good, maybe that's a not a good thing for Kubernetes itself. If there's a huge kind of splintering of these things, if we can't actually count on any particular policy implementations existing.
Yeah, I remember you sent me a message on Slack like days ago about the Brandon is writing up a CRD like back to the KEP describing the CRD. So it has certain flavor of the type system things we are looking at, right?
Sure, I'm trying to remember.
Safe network. I think before the KubeCon, we should have like enough case studies to go have some very interesting discussion.
Europe's always a good place to have the discussions too, since it seems that they're leading the drive towards having some controls on things.
Okay, then let's try to get to CI/CD maybe next week or the week next. Yeah, see if team had time after the 14 release, come over, have the Seagulls update. Maybe you can find someone from the SIG network.
What about, is there anything on the like cloud and infrastructure side we're missing?
I can think of like OpenStack. Do you mean like infrastructure like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could invite like folks from OpenStack side to talk about. So they have like the policy in code for the RBAC IAM system.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe there's like a separate category, like with the goes sort of with like SE Linux, which is a lot of it is learning from what has come before, and that yes, we sort of have to integrate with now, but don't never think about. Oh, and it looks like also the safe working group. Oh no, that's a while ago. Okay.
So I attend SAFE last week or the week before. They are doing the something template. So they're focusing on the like onboarding security project.
Right. It seems like the kind of they're talking about almost like the meta process of like what each project would need to present, and
Yeah.
having a template for that presentation so that everybody's kind of answering the same questions and providing the supplemental material that each project should come up with before they present. So it's kind of a standardized flow through. Once a project is referred to them, then everybody kind of follows the same process. So it's been pretty meta discussion, at least the sessions that I've attended.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, Ash will probably, if I'm not sure if he's the very next guinea pig, but Ash will be one of the next guinea pigs to present OPA to SAFE. So that will be a good instantiation of what they're thinking. And again, they're still in the kind of iteration phase of getting feedback from everyone who presents. So I suspect that template and the process itself will be tweaked a couple more times. It's like they need a policy.
I just came across old notes in SAFE and saw something I hadn't seen before. Policy-based encryption. Looks like they discussed it before I had started paying attention or joined in.
There used to be a notion, there's a concept of identity-based encryption. I'm not sure if that's the same thing as policy-based encryption.
Probably it's in. Policies are bound to data by encrypting the data under a symmetric key that a sender and receiver conditionally share based on fulfillment of policies.
Yeah, that smacks of the identity-based kind of schemes that were popular, I don't know, 5-10 years back. But I'm not, is there a use of that somewhere in?
I was reading in the SAFE working group notes, they were talking about in the big data working group. It seems where it's coming in.
Yeah, that might, the another context that might fall into are things like trusted execution environments where you've got stuff like the Intel SGX special processor and memory protection, and kind of have data encryption that occurs in a very special part of the chip, and there's going to be some communication with the untrusted parts of the system. So I don't know, maybe there's some policy around, you know, what data fields you might want to put in the TCB or in the trusted execution enclave, and you know how it gets in and out, and how you manage keys around that. No, I'm just guessing though.
Yeah, we kind of discussed that a little bit, but we haven't actually. I guess I don't know of a good people working on it in a way that'd be a good source or way to bring it in to the conversation besides academic interest. Does that make sense?
Do you know someone who can cover this, Robert? The team.
I know. So the group that's I don't. It's not a Kubernetes facing group per se, but they're a Google group called the Silo, ASYLO. I guess it's derived from Greek for asylum. But they've got a project going that's trying to build out and in fact, I think they've implemented gRPC that can run in the enclave. So I mean, clearly there's some positioning that would be compatible with Kubernetes, but I don't know that they're formally focused on trying to integrate that in with Kubernetes. But I can reach out to them.
Yeah, sure. Please do that. It's not like have to do with Kubernetes. So
yeah, I mean, you know, if they I think they're using Go. I think they've implemented gRPC, so if it's not directly targeting, it's obviously somewhat peripheral and related. So
Yeah.
there is a project. This one is a little bit. I think it's a private company, and all of their papers are very academic. I think they present at like the Usenix groups, but they've got a project called Scone. Secure container or something, and they've released a bunch of papers on how you can, create a shim between Docker and the TEE, and then run your container wholly in the enclave. So, I mean, people have done it. I'm not sure that it's, the use cases are well defined. I think this notion, Azure has this project called confidential computing that you can, I don't know if it's on their Kubernetes or in VMs, but you can run in enclaves on Azure. And I think probably Google wants to get to that point at some point. Not sure if Red Hat or Amazon or anyone else is working on that stuff.
But I know there's some, within Red Hat, we have a kind of a group that meets for, let me find the TPM kind of things. And other sort of related sort of hardware level. It's a little bit outside my org and not yet, it seems, at the level that it's able to integrate right now at like the Kubernetes level. Can reach out though and kind of ask some other people what's going on there. What about how much do people think these are real? So, like, how much of an advance in security are these? Maybe this isn't. I'll ask some. There's also a lot of like flaws or exploits that have come out against these sorts of things recently. It's interesting.
Sorry, you were talking about the TE enclave itself?
Yeah, any of the hardware level solutions too.
Yeah, you're right. There were a couple of papers, and I don't know if they were actually like CVEs, but there were a couple of exploits demonstrated around side channel and timing and page fault type of attacks. So, I mean, it's definitely not. So I think Intel is the main proponent of these things and kind of waved away.
Yeah, there's that stuff.
So, I don't know that anyone is convinced that it's a silver bullet, but I don't know that it's necessarily it's completely disproven as a security.
Seems like surely it should at least be an advancement. Like it should be better than before.
Yeah, and I really believe it's been a while since I read the specs and what have you, but Intel I think baked into theirs. I don't know about AMD and ARM, but they did bake in the notion of being able to do updates to at least, obviously not the hardware, but to put remediative firmware and such around it. So, I think even if there are some exploits that you might find, they can probably patch some of it around it. But if someone finds an exploit that's a hardware redesign issue, then by definition, just like the meltdown and Spectre things, you're just gonna have to wait for the next generation of chips.
And UC Berkeley has also a T project called Keystone Enclave. Provide like RISC-V based trust computing environment.
Yeah, I think the idea is to be able to build like an open, design hardware device, if your own chip, if you want.
Yeah. So to come back to the topic, so the policy related aspect of the TEs we are interested in is like defining what part should be put in the enclave.
Yeah, I think there would be, I mean, I don't know, honestly, I don't know if it's interesting enough, and it may just be academic, but yeah, I think if you were going to define a policy around TE, it would be identifying, what data should move into the enclave, and then what kind of authentication and access control should be around data moving out of the enclave.
Interesting.
So you wouldn't, for example, data is protected outside of the enclave, but once it's in there, it's open, and of course you can pretty much run any C code, any x86 code in the enclave, so it could easily leak data out, either deliberately or unknown.
Yeah. Please help find if you know people in this area. Could come over, give a talk. Definitely, it will be very interesting.
Yeah, sure. I'll reach out and see if I get any responses.
Cool. Okay. Any other suggestions or any other topics?
I can't think of any.
I just had a quick question. Is that the strong typing proposed talk? Is there like a review slide or some write up on that? I was just curious about reviewing.
You mean the adverbs?
Well, on the Google Doc, you mentioned that one of the talks that was submitted for KubeCon was about strong typing. Just curious if there were slides or a preview of that talk somewhere.
Definitely, Erica had a great slide last year for the. I can.
You had some slides from the deep dive last time.
Yeah.
And then the proposal, but as we got rejected from we didn't get our talk accepted. We didn't make new slides exactly. But maybe we should still do that kind of presentation, even if it's just to ourselves. That might be a good.
Definitely not trying to create extra work, but I was just curious.
Oh no!
Okay, I'm just adding the slide from last year here. Shit.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
You can check it out. Okay, anything else?
Not on my side.
Cool. I think, yeah, we can just conclude the meeting and go fight another day.
All right. Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
All right. We'll talk next week.
Okay. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.